Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast about getting out of busy, overwhelm, and moving fully into God's calling, where we're experiencing freedom and abundance and peace. I'm Liz Ferricks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Hello. Happy Friday.
Yes. Everyone's favorite day of the week. Woohoo!
Yep. So today we're going to try to wrap up what we've been talking about all week with these barriers to centered. I always want to skip one, but we're doing barriers to centered.
Yes. We've been talking about being centered and why it's hard.
Yeah. So today we're going to do a little bit of a summary and some practical things to try.
You know, one of the problems with not being centered, like we've talked about, is just being a little bit off balance. And that so contributes to that problem of being overwhelmed and overly busy. Because it's like, you know, if you're standing a little bit on, for instance, if you're on your tiptoes and somebody pushes you, it's really easy for them to push you over. Whereas if you're kind of, you know, putting your full weight on your entire foot and you're sinking down, you know, you have a lot more stability. You have a lot more balance. And so when we're not centered, when we're not living out of who God designed us to be, we're much more apt to just be firefighters.
Yeah.
To just go from one thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, without any real intentionality or, you know, without doing the things that are our heart passions. I've recently been reading through Proverbs, and one of the things in there that's so interesting to me is, you know, it constantly talks about how, like, a cheerful heart is good medicine, and just all these different verses about how our health is tied up with having, you know, that positive outlook. And if we're not centered, we can't have a positive outlook. It's just impossible, which means that everything is more stressful, at least for me. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced that too, dear.
Well, yeah, definitely. I think one of the evidences in my life when I've been drifting off center, which, you know, is me drifting away from God really, is getting angry more easily. And being, I don't know, getting caught up in this, and this makes me angry too, but this idea of like, I don't understand why this is happening, you know, kind of cosmic confusion, or more close to home too. Like, why are my kids doing this? Why is my wife doing this? What's going on? Why can't it be easier? And I'm not centered then. I mean, that's a big indicator for me. The practical is to sink down into my feet again, into my relationship with God and get my perspective back.
Right, because if you don't have that, I don't know, there's just such a peace and I don't even know how to explain it. It's like that kind of like the eye of the storm. If you are hanging on to yourself and who you're designed to be and you're living out of that, it doesn't matter how crazy circumstances are. Like, you can come at it with a clear mind and a peaceful heart, and it changes everything. And one of the things I've told you guys before, I read through my journal like every day as part of my daily routine. And one of the things I have written in there is whatever energy I put into something, it gets reflected back. And so what I mean by that is not like there's no crazy new age metaphysical energy here, but just the idea that, you know, my attitude going into something is always what's reflected back at me.
Yeah.
If I look at the dishes and go, oh my goodness, there are so many dishes, this is going to take so long. Guess what? It takes so long. Whereas if I come at it and go, oh, there's not that many dishes today, it goes so much more quickly, you know, because I don't have that emotional baggage going into it. And it's the same thing with our kids or with any relationship. If I come at it and I'm tired and I'm cranky, you know, Proverbs talks about how a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. As soon as I start being cranky, it stirs up the other person's crankiness, and then I get crankier and they get crankier, and it's bad.
Yeah. And before we get in some of the practical how to get back from it, I think another of the big indicators for anybody would be also pet peeves getting more and more annoying. So like not being able to handle your pet peeves, like whatever it may be, somebody, I don't know, I can't think of an example right now. But yeah, if your pet if people around you are constantly pinging your pet peeves, sheesh, then
Like
that's
if
a
your wife is randomly deciding to do a bunch of math.
yeah, sure, that happened today. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, not just math for fun, but for me, yeah, it would come back to what I said earlier, getting angry or getting angry or not getting or getting angry or being confused about the plan that was happening earlier. Where it's like, where's this coming from? Why are we doing this now and not this other thing?
Another indicator that I've found for myself is if it's something that takes energy without giving any energy back. For instance, I know that small talk is not my thing. Like, I can handle a little bit of it, but it's very draining for me as an introvert to not have a conversation that ends up going somewhere. That is something that I'm working on practicing, but at the same time, I know that it's more the way God's designed me not to be an extrovert, a social butterfly kind of person that, goes around and grabs new people and just has short conversations with them. And there are people who are designed to do that. Our daughter's one of them, and she's amazing at it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord has definitely used that in our church life to have somebody who's so welcoming. And if you're like that, go for it. But for people who are not like that, it's a huge drain. And so recognizing that's just not part of who God's made me to be, and being able to step back from that and say, well, maybe that means I'm not supposed to be doing it,
Sure, and that kind of ties into my last indicator too, is making yourself do this or that.
Oh, yeah.
Then it kind of, because of either piety or guilt or self-shame or something, like, I better do the ought to do stuff.
Yeah, anytime
motivation.
you hear yourself say, oh, I really should do that. That's something that I'm working on. Yeah. Like, anytime I hear myself say, I should do this, I try to stop and go, why should I do this?
Right. And that means you're not moving from center at that point.
Right.
Versus the other side of that would be out of a more of a devotional kind of motivation of like, because I really love this person, or because I really love God, or because I'm trying to be obedient. I mean, saying I'm trying to be obedient versus ought to are pretty similar, but they can be finely defined too. I mean, obedience to God is a great motivator. I ought to do this because I'm going to shame myself if I don't, is not.
Right. So, well, and obedience to God comes out of love for Him.
That's right.
We were just talking about that this weekend, that the love of Christ is what compels us.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are all ways to tell maybe you're not moving from your center. And then now we're going to talk about ways to get back into your center. Some of these we mentioned earlier in the week.
Right. Yeah. On Monday one of the things we talked about was that, often God uses our pain and turns it into our passion. So that would be one thing if you're like, oh man, I am so bored and so stuck, to look and see, well, where has your pain been in your life? And how can you allow God to turn that into your passion and to help heal other people?
Yeah, because it's easier to move out in that devotion or love response if it's a passion. If it's just something, because then you're back in ought to. Like, if it's not really there, you're like, well, I guess they need someone for the baby class, at church.
Right.
Maybe you shouldn't be in there with the babies if you're just going to hate it the whole time,
Yeah, well, and the thing is, we're all part of the body. The church is a body.
Yeah.
And if you, as an eye, are trying to do the job of a toe, not only will you be miserable and ineffective, but then the toe can't do its job.
All right, what are some of the other practicals? we could spend all day on that.
That's true. Something else, a verse that I discovered in the course of my Bible study a few years ago that I have kept close to my heart is Galatians 1:10. Paul says, am I now trying to win the approval of men or of God? Or am I trying to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a servant of Christ. And so, we talked about how we sometimes get stuck in this. We're pleasing our family, we're pleasing our culture, we're pleasing, whoever.
Yeah, we talked about that on Tuesday, getting pushed out of the slipstream.
Really what you have to go back to is, am I pleasing God? I mean, that's something that I try to ask all the time, especially because I think if you have people in your life who are, people that are important to you, who are always trying to point your compass somewhere else.
Yeah, because they care about you. They want you maybe to be safe, or to have some sort of security in the future or something.
Right,
That's
like we
usually the
talked about with
motivation.
Andrea Pennington's talk,
Yeah.
her TED talk about how her parents, wanted her to be a doctor because they thought that if she was going to go on stage, it wouldn't provide financially for her.
Yeah.
So,
There's more chance of becoming a successful doctor than a successful actor.
right. Or like I talked about with my childhood on yesterday, talking about how, for my family, a big motivator or a big value is having good grades. But is that a value for the Lord? Like, he has a value of, trying your best and being faithful in the little things and stuff like that. So if you're not getting good grades because you're not turning in your homework, then maybe you should rethink that. But if it's just, you've done your best and that's where you're at, you're still pleasing God, regardless of whether or not anyone else is pleased.
Yeah, I think, he cares more about whether you're learning or not and growing and changing.
We also talked about having a false view of self and talked about, asking God to tell you who you are. Because that's really what we need. We need the Lord to define who we are. Otherwise, we get sucked into wearing either our own masks or, expectations other people put on us. And one of the best ways that I've found to do that is just having a list of verses and reading them through regularly.
Identity. Yeah, these identity verses where God in his word has described his followers.
Exactly.
And that's, and that's us.
Yes. And we also, you had mentioned the examine where you are in your family roles.
Yeah, like if, you're familiar with that, if you're the peacekeeper, or you're the initiator, or the comforter, or the responsible one or something, examine that, especially if it kind of bothers you that you always get stuck doing that stuff. Look at it and be like, well, why do I do that? Is it because of kind of my spiritual DNA? Is God designed me that way to be that? Or has it been put on me somehow? Either I took the mantle on myself or somebody put the mantle on me in the past sometime. And do I really want to keep carrying that? That's a tough inventory to take, but it's fruitful.
And one of the other ones that we talked about yesterday with the self-worth issues is this idea of steeping yourself in your belovedness. Kind of like you're a cup of tea. So really, allowing God to tell you how amazing you are to him and how precious you are to him, and steeping yourself in the gospel. And really, I think we so often get stuck, at least for me anyway, I get stuck in like being reminded of the gospel at certain times of the year, or when I read certain books, like we talked about, reading books that have redemptive themes. So there are certain times in my life that I have built in to, really
and that's good,
focus on the gospel. But at the same time, I keep thinking, if I did that every single day, where would I be at in a year? And that's really the question you have to ask yourself with all this stuff is, where do I want to be at in a year? Because if you don't change what you're doing right now, if you do what you've always done, you end up with the results you've always had.
Yeah.
So, and that, honestly, that is one of the hugest motivators to me, because the idea that I might have the same problems, a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now is terrifying, frankly.
Yeah. And I don't know how many people I've talked to where it seems like that's kind of what happens. It's just like, well, it's been a struggle, and well, for how long,
Right. Well, and a lot of
years?
people think I'll get to it when I get to it, when life gets different. And we've been talking on here about how, your circumstances don't change till your heart changes. So you have to start with the heart change, even though it's really hard.
Yeah. And that is the power of the gospel of grace, because that locks in your identity as a child of God, someone who's been redeemed and forgiven, whose sins are wiped from God's mind.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be a life changer. And if you're a Christian and that's not really this big life changing thing, dive into the gospel of grace. Start there and get your identity get that, because that's our center. We stand on that bedrock of salvation as Christians.
All right. Well, we are so glad that you guys were here with us today. And thank you to everybody that's been sharing the podcast. And as always, if you find this helpful, please share it with 2 or 3 people. And we passionately believe that the church will be better the more people that are, living in the slipstream, that are actually aligned with the way God designed them to work. And as a body, we're passionate about helping people get there because it makes such a difference.
Yeah, that's our goal with this podcast, is to put it more in the forefront of our minds and in yours as well. And if you're on Facebook, please join our Facebook group. Join in the discussion. We post each episode.
All right, we're praying for you guys. We love you, and I hope that you have an awesome Friday and a great weekend. Don't forget to work on applying the CSCs. And if you have any cool breakthroughs where you're like, oh man, I totally realized that normally I would not be calm, and I just remembered to be calm because you guys have been talking about it so much, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we would. All right.
We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.